When I was 7 years old, my dad and my stepmom were looking for houses to rent, so they took my sister and I to look at one. We pulled up to a house with a tree swing in the front yard. There was a little girl about my age, swinging, watching us as we got out of the car. She had pigtails and was wearing a dress, although it was cold outside. She didn't say anything, just watched us as we walked in front of her. My dad, stepmom and sister didn't even look at her, so I said hi. The little girl looked at me, our eyes met, and she stopped swinging. She continued to stare at me as we turned and walked down the walkway to the front door. I asked my stepmom why we were there. She said we were going to rent this house. I can still see the girl out of the corner of my eye as we walked up the porch and through the front door. I stated what I thought was obvious, that we can't because someone already lives there. My stepmom said, "No one lives here, it's our house now." I told her that little girl lives here. She said, "What little girl?" There was a big window right beside the front door looking out at the front yard and the tree swing. I looked out the window, and the swing was empty, but swinging in big, long swings as if someone is, in fact, sitting in it actively swinging. There were no bushes or buildings or anywhere a child could hide. The yard was empty, except for the tree and its swing. It had literally been like 2 seconds since I walked through the doorway where I could see the girl out of the corner of my eye to then looking out the window and seeing no one. That was just the first experience with that house and its spirits. She wasn't scary, but other things in the house were. I would hear heavy footsteps in this house, like a tall man wearing heavy work boots. My dad was a welder who wore steel-toed boots, and it sounded just like that. I would hear the footsteps going from the front door, through the kitchen, through the living room behind the couch, and into the first bedroom that my sister and I shared. My stepmom kept the door closed. She said it was to keep the house warm because that room was always cold. But I found out later she was creeped out by that room. Sometimes the footsteps would just stop at the closed door, but sometimes the door would open and then shut on its own. I always wanted the door open and refused to sleep in there with it closed. My dad hated leaving the door open since the room was right off the living room and he worked late sometimes and liked to stay up watching TV. My dad and sister didn't hear the footsteps, but I knew my stepmom did. I could see her get nervous and stiff and follow the footsteps with her eyes when they went behind the couch where everyone sat. I wouldn't sit on the couch. I always sat on the opposite wall in the armchair even though I had to look at the TV sideways. I asked my stepmom about the footsteps and how they filled me with fear. She told me they couldn't hurt me, that they were just an echo from people who used to live there. My dad used to get home late after we went to bed, and he'd come in and check on me and my sister before closing the door and going to watch TV. One night, I heard his big, heavy boots come from the front door into our room. Instead of leaving after a few seconds, he stood there. He was angry. I could feel his anger, getting angrier and angrier, like a stifling feeling. I could hear him breathing harder and harder as he got angrier. Finally, I rolled onto my back to look at him standing at the foot of my bed. It wasn't my dad. A tall man with broad shoulders and thick, longish dark hair stood there. He wore a blue checked heavy woodman-type work shirt and dirty jeans. He had no face. Where his face should have been was a black mass of fast-moving scribbles like a child was using a black crayon or marker and scribbling out his face. I tried to scream, but my breath had left me. I was so scared I wet the bed. I sat up to leap out of bed, but when I moved, he climbed up on the bed, arms and legs on each side of me, that horrible scribbly face and his anger radiating. I pulled the covers over my head and laid back down, telling myself that he couldn't hurt me. He laid down on top of me, his heavy weight pressing me into the mattress, and pushing the blanket into my face so I couldn't breathe. Heavier and heavier, the weight pressed down on me. I struggled but couldn't get up. I finally managed to turn my head and scream. My stepmom said it was the most blood-curdling scream she'd ever heard. She thought I was being murdered. When she burst into the room and turned on the light, she said she couldn't see me in the bed. She pulled off the covers and she swore she saw my body pressed down into the mattress. My body was flat under the covers next to the clearly visible shape of my sister, who was still sleeping next to me. When she jumped onto the bed, she said, "Let her go!" She saw and felt the weight leave the mattress and my body come up from where I was pressed into the mattress. She hugged me and I cried and cried, but then chewed her out for saying, "He couldn't hurt me." She kept saying, "I know, and I'm sorry." My dad came in demanding to know what the noise was about, angry at being woken up. My stepmom was pretty upset and said she had told him so, and now look what happened. She wanted to move immediately, but my dad refused, and he paid all the bills, so we had no choice but to stay in that house. But I never went into that room again. My stepmom moved the couch and TV. My sister and I slept on the floor with the TV on all night. I would still hear the heavy footsteps walking past where we slept going into that room, and the door would open and close, but he never strayed from that path. I never saw him again, and he never bothered me again, but I never went in that room after that. I did, however, see the two little kid spirits after this happened. There was a large opening between the dining room and living room. The kitchen was behind a wall from the living room, but the dining room and kitchen was one big room. We had a couple cats. I would sit on my bed on the floor in the living room and roll balls from there into the dining room, bounce them off the far wall so it would come back to me. The cats would chase it. Sometimes the cat would bat the ball sideways into the kitchen where it bounced off the cabinets, and I'd have to get off the bed to get it. When this happened, the ball would bounce out quickly. Great fun for all, including the unseen residents, it turns out. Sometimes, the ball would bounce sideways into the kitchen and get stuck under the lower cabinets, and I'd have to go around the wall into the kitchen to get it out. The cats usually chased the ball when it went sideways into the kitchen. One day, my sister was outside playing with my stepmom, and I was by myself in the living room, throwing the ball. The cat batted it sideways, and it went thunk, like it did when it got stuck under the cabinets. I started to get up and go get it when I heard whispering in the kitchen. I froze. I noticed the cats were crouched in the dining room, staring into the kitchen, tails swishing, staring expectantly like they do when they wait for me to toss the ball. The hair stood up on my body and I suddenly felt electrified. I heard someone move in the kitchen and I heard another voice whispering. It sounded like two children. I heard a little girl's voice say,
"Don't, you'll make him mad."
Then, the ball bounced out of the kitchen at an angle, so it rolled into the living room but far away from me. I watched the ball roll, and as I'm watching the ball, I saw a little boy's face peek around the wall to the kitchen. I looked over at him, and I could still see him, and his hand around the edge of the wall. When I looked at him, he pulled back. I was frozen and so scared I couldn't speak or move. I could only see the edge of his face and his hand. After a moment, he peeked around the corner again. He was younger than me at that time, maybe 5 or 6, and he had brown hair. He looked washed out with faded dull colors. I heard whispering behind him, the little girl voice again, sounding scared now. I waved at the boy. He waved back, smiling shyly. Then, the cats went tearing out of the kitchen and across the living room back to my dad's room. At the same moment, heavy footfalls thumped into the living room. The boy disappeared, and the door of my old bedroom slammed shut. My stepmom came running into the house asking what's wrong. I told her I'm okay and asked why. She said she heard me scream and start crying. I told her it wasn't me. I then told her the whole story. I told her how scared I was and to make them go away. She told me to be nice to them, they were just kids like me, and it was terrible that they were stuck in that house with that horrible man. When we moved out, she asked me to ask them to come with us if they wanted to. She was so worried for them. I did, not thinking anything would happen, but at least one of them, the little boy, did come with us. I saw him once at the next house. I think he actually followed me for years. I never saw the little girl again after that first day seeing her on the swing. I hope they both escaped that angry man. I'm happy I did. I never want to set foot in that rental house again.